So grateful for your participation tonight, and we are looking forward to our third presentation by Carolyn Osiek. Carolyn, please.
So this evening we're doing some interesting women characters in the Gospel of John, and then also something about the women at the tomb across the Gospels, because I knew that I had it first on the agenda for last week, and I knew that that was not going to work. So let's take on the Gospel of John if I can. These PowerPoints tend to get stuck on screen sharing. So we are going to look at the Samaritan woman, at Martha and Mary, and at the mother of Jesus and her sister. Of course, Mary Magdalene looms large, but we'll deal with her next week. Now, you are probably aware that the Gospel of John is an oddity as Gospels go. Some of the things that we take for granted in Gospels from the Synoptics are not there. There are no infancy stories. We start, remember, with what we call the prologue in the beginning. There's no human creeping in there, It's from the beginning of creation. There's no transfiguration scene. And it's been said that the entire gospel is transfiguration. Very interesting for us. There's no sending on mission with instructions. If you're following the readings of the liturgy just today, we had Luke's version of sending out the further 72, not only the 12, but even more, a big mission operation. There's nothing like that. The entire gospel is about sending, but it's God who sends Jesus, who then sends them into the world. But you don't really get that part of it until the last part of the gospel, particularly the Last Supper narrative. So no naming of the 12, no list of the 12. John knows the tradition of the 12. There are references to it twice. At the end of chapter 6, Peter is one of the 12, and he says the 12 were with him. And Thomas in chapter 20, doubting Thomas, is one of the 12. So John knows that tradition, even Paul does back in 1 Corinthians 15, but he doesn't spell out the names of the 12. There's a portrayal of Jesus as wisdom in human form, and this is, we refer to it sometimes as Sophia. The figure of wisdom looms large in particularly the Jewish theology of the Hellenistic period, just before the New Testament. You have the Book of Wisdom and of Sirach and Proverbs, and this portrayal of a feminine figure whom we dub Sophia. We can call her wisdom, we can call her whatever we want. And that feminine figure is one who is with God from the beginning, has a part to play in creation, the creation of everything, remains with God, and also comes to dwell with people, particularly with Judaism in Jerusalem. This is all in Sirach 24, Sirach, which is also called Ecclesiasticus. You have further the promise of wisdom. The one who eats of me will hunger for more. The one who drinks of me will thirst for more. Food and water. Reverse order. And in the Gospel of John, the whole thing about living water in chapter 4 with the Samaritan woman, about bread that satisfies in the Bread of Life discourse in chapter 6. So there are many ways in which, and then remember the prologue, in the beginning was the Word, always there with God. So there are ways in which the masculine figure of Jesus, historically masculine, is portrayed as wisdom now incarnate, now becoming human. And of course, the theology of John goes further than wisdom and actually posits divinity of Jesus. But that theme of wisdom is an interesting one. So let's look at the significance of some unnamed figures in the Gospel of John. That's what I find interesting. The ones who are not named. You have the Samaritan woman, the mother of Jesus, who is not named. She has a sister named Mary, and the beloved disciple. Beloved disciple, later tradition identifies with John, the son of Zebedee, the brother of James, but it's later tradition. The beloved disciple is this mysterious figure who only occurs in the latter part of the gospel and always does the right thing and is always there at the right moment. It's the beloved disciple when they're in the boat in chapter 21, who says, and Jesus is standing on the shore talking to them, it is the Lord. It's he who recognizes it. When at the empty tomb, when Mary has come back, Mary Magdalene has come back and said, I don't know where the body is, they've taken the body. And Peter and the beloved disciple run to the tomb, and it says the beloved disciple saw and believed. It doesn't say Peter does, it says the beloved disciple. So the beloved disciple is always this ideal yet mysterious figure. So we have these three characters. So let's look at the Samaritan woman. This lovely mosaic is from where is this? This is from San Apollinare in San Apollinare Nuovo in Ravenna. It's 6th century. And let's just for a moment go through some of the narrative of that story. At the beginning, it says that Jesus and his disciples were it's a very odd statement. It's mixed up in the text, and it's been tampered with, and nobody really knows what it's supposed to do. But really, it says, when Jesus learned that the Pharisees heard that Jesus is making and baptizing more disciples than John, although it wasn't Jesus himself, but his disciples who baptized. You try to figure that one out. He left Judea and he started back to Galilee, and he had to go through Samaria. He didn't have to go through Samaria at all. Galileans regularly avoided Samaria by going across the river and going up the in Transjordan. But you have then Jesus and his disciples coming to Sychar, and they are at Jacob's well. Now, for readers, hearers who know their biblical stories, the idea of a man meeting a woman at a well has all kinds of reverberations, because Moses meets his wife-to-be, Zipporah, at a well. Jacob's servant meets the bride-to-be for Jacob at a well. There are other examples. Those are the big ones. So man and woman at well already sets off some kind of vibes. And it says that she came to draw water, and it's the middle of the day. Yes, that's unusual. It's also unusual that the disciples had gone off to buy food in the middle of the day and left Jesus there, because that's siesta time, the hot part of the day. So it's very odd that this is the middle of the day, but it is what makes it possible for only the two of them to be there. Now, in cultures like this, women go together either once in the morning, or sometimes once in the morning and once in the late afternoon. They all go together to get the water. And those are very important times for women to talk to each other. That is when they're able to be in community with each other, to talk to each other. I'll tell you briefly a little story of a place that I was at for a couple of times, a village in Nigeria, where a school was built very next to the village. The village women would go twice a day to the river to get water. The school put in an artesian well, and they offered to let the village come and also use the water from the artesian well. The women got together and talked about it, and they declined the offer. The reason was the well was too close to the village, and they would not have time to tell each other their problems on the way. So I think that that is a really good illustration of what's missing here, you see. And we can speculate, people speculate all the time. Why was the woman there in the middle of the day? Is it because of the 5 husbands and women didn't like her or whatever? I mean, we just don't know. But it is anomalous, and it sets up the dynamic for the encounter. So Jesus takes the initiative, asking her, this is a strange man talking to a woman he doesn't know. It's not proper. And he says, give me a drink, but he has no way to do it because he doesn't have a bucket. And she looks at him and says, you're a Jew and you're asking me, a Samaritan, for a drink? And he says, if you knew the gift of God, you would ask me and I would give you. Now, we translate this living water. So let's stop for a minute. In the Gospel of John, you can take items in a story at a literal level, but there's always another meaning. There's always another meaning on top. And it's as if Jesus plays with her here. We translate this living water, but it would be better really to translate it as running water, because that's the way you say it in Greek. Living water is running water. So it doesn't necessarily have a spiritual level all the time. It's the normal way that you say running water. So if he says, if you had known, you would ask me and I would give you running water. The well is not running water. It's sitting water, standing water, you see. But the play on the words is already there. And she says, how are you going to do that? And who do you think you are? Are you greater than our ancestors here, you know? And Jesus says, everyone who drinks of this water will thirst again. But those who drink of the water I will give them will never thirst. Flashback in Sirach chapter 24. Those who drink of me will thirst for more wisdom. And Jesus says, those who drink of me will find their thirst satisfied. You won't have to go any further, you see. And the same kinds of claims are being made in chapter 6 about the bread of life. So he says, the water I will give you, I will give them, will become a spring of water gushing up to eternal life. And now we know we're talking at a spiritual level about this living water. But she doesn't get it yet. She says, so give me this water so I don't have to come back to the well all the time. And at that point comes the thing about the husbands. Okay, so she has had 5 husbands. He knows that, and she quickly changes the subject to say, I see that you're a prophet. So will you solve our liturgy problem, please? We say that we worship here on Mount Gerizim, and you say, the Jews say, you should worship in Jerusalem. And he basically says, well, none of the above, because the time is coming when those who worship God will worship in spirit and truth. And so we're now really into the theological area. And then she says, I know the Messiah is coming. He will proclaim all things to us. And Jesus says, I'm the one. Here I am. And then the disciples came back, and you have the dynamic of the conversation broken. But she leaves her water jar and runs back into the city. And I think the leaving of the water jar is significant. It will no longer hold the kind of water that Jesus will give. So she runs back to the city and says, you won't believe what happened. There's this man that I met there, and he told me everything I ever did. And they listen to her, and then they come and they see and they hear for themselves. Now, I said that there's no instruction for mission in John. There's no sending out of the disciples until you get to the Last Supper discourse and chapter 20, actually. But what you have is modeling. And the Samaritan woman, this unnamed woman, it seems to me, does that modeling. Jesus models evangelization. He shows how you draw someone in step by step. The spider said to the fly, it's each step just takes her a little further. And until she comes to faith in him. So he shows how you attract someone to the truth that he offers. And she really models discipleship in that she responds to his invitation step by step, but then she goes out and tells what she has seen and heard and experienced. And then it says at the end, it's almost a put down of her, but it says that the villagers say to her, well, now we don't believe because of what you said anymore, but because of what we have seen and heard. But the cycle is repeated. And so the whole process of discipleship and apostleship it's lived out in her, really, and in this encounter. You may be surprised in the mosaic to notice that Jesus is beardless. He is in all of this early portrayal. He's portrayed as a young man without a beard. It's only when you get later into the imperial trappings that Jesus acquires a beard. So let's look then at the mother of Jesus. I like to think of her in John's gospel as the gatekeeper. She's the one who opens his public ministry at Cana. Remember? They're at the wedding feast and they run out of wine, and the mother of Jesus says, they have no wine. Well, what am I supposed to do about it, says Jesus. And she says to the stewards, do whatever he tells you. And at the end of that story, it says, he manifested his glory and his disciples believed in him. So the mother of Jesus, unnamed mother of Jesus, is the one who really opens his public ministry, because that's the first manifestation of it. And there she is at the cross, at the end, closing it, closing his ministry, his destiny on earth. And so it says in John 19:25, standing at the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. How many women are there? There's his mother. There's his mother's sister, and in English it works the same way in Greek. Is Mary that's the name of the mother's sister. We take it in the second way, that we have the mother's name is Mary, wife of Clopas, and Clopas is the same as Cleopas. In the Emmaus story, remember that we have Cleopas and another disciple on the way to Emmaus, and could be Mrs. Cleopas, could be the same, intended to be the same person, and Mary Magdalene. So isn't it interesting? How do we imagine that scene? And do we always imagine it through the narration of John, like this? It's the only gospel in which the mother of Jesus is there. Suddenly, in the next verse, Jesus saw the beloved disciple. And then you have the saying, woman, behold your son, son, behold your mother. Where did he come from? He wasn't there in the statement just before about who was there. And long ago, Saunders Snyder's made the suggestion that the beloved disciple isn't always the same figure. That the beloved disciple, the identity of the beloved disciple can change, and that at that moment, it's Mary Magdalene. That could well be. When you get to chapter 21 and they're out in the boat and the beloved disciple is there and they're fishing all night, that's not going to be Mary Magdalene. No, that's going to be a bunch of guys. But maybe there's something to that otherwise he just miraculously disappears after the statement of who was there. So how do you imagine this scene? I think we are overwhelmingly socialized to imagine it with the male beloved disciple and the mother of Jesus, and then sometimes Mary Magdalene sort of groveling below. This is a classic depiction. Even though John is one gospel among four, and the others don't portray it like this at all. Mary Magdalene there, yes. No mother of Jesus, no beloved disciple. Why are there so many Marys? Well, there is a reason for this. There were at least 3 Hebrew and Aramaic names that were very popular that are different, Mirie, Mariam, and Marie. And in Greek, they all come out as Maria or Mariam. And that is really why we have so many Marys. A study was done of women's names by somebody not interested in the Gospels at all, of Jewish women's names in the burials around the area of Jerusalem at this period, and 25% of the names were some version of that, of what comes out as Mary. So. And then we have the death of the mother of Jesus. And it is often portrayed like this. You've probably seen these pictures, these lovely pictures of the disciples gathered around, and the mother of Jesus is deceased. The title that you can't read very well on the one on the left is the Dormition of the Theotokos. Dormition, falling asleep, because very early is the tradition about Mary's Assumption. And even though it took till, 1954 or so for a definition of it, it's a very old tradition. But Jesus is standing there holding this little creature, which is the soul of Mary, the spirit of Mary, which is a lovely tradition. There is a church, some of you have probably been there, on what is now called Mount Zion, which wasn't Mount Zion in ancient times, south of the old city, just outside Zion Gate. And it's not an old church. It was built around 1900. It belongs to a Benedictine monastery from Germany. And in the crypt at the bottom, you walk down some stairs, and in the middle is this same thing, the effigy of Mary asleep, ready for an Assumption. And above her is this lovely mosaic baldacchino of Jesus in the middle, and 6 biblical women. Bottom left is Eve, and then to the right, you've got Miriam with her tambourine, and then Yael, who drives the tent post into the enemies. Esther, and then Esther. So Mary, asleep, looks up and sees these lovely things, lovely women who have gone before her. Also, if just before you cross the road and head up toward the Temple Mount, there is this, you go down some stairs and there is this facade that you go into, and inside there are more steps going down to what's called a cenotaph, a monument that without a body. And it's Crusader period. It's now a Greek Orthodox church chapel, but it's built in the Crusader period, and the queens of Jerusalem were buried along the sides of the stairs. The kings were buried in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So Mary has a tomb in Jerusalem, but she also has a house in Ephesus in Western Turkey. And that is due to a very old tradition that putting together several things, that the beloved disciple is John, the son of Zebedee, to whom she is entrusted by Jesus at the cross, and that John then moved to Western Asia Minor, to Western Turkey. A mystic, Catherine Emmerich, in the 1800s, saw a vision of a house of Mary in Ephesus, up in the hills. And someone, she described where it was, and someone went there and found some very old foundations of buildings and built this chapel. And it's a place of pilgrimage today, and it's very interesting. Muslim women come, and Christians, of course, to commemorate the beloved disciple taking into his home the mother of Jesus. We move on to Martha and Mary, and now they have a brother, Lazarus. Mary, we call her Mary of Bethany. It's in John 11, the beginning of John 11. It says Mary, and this is the sister of Martha, at a banquet at their house, anoints Jesus' feet with perfume and wipes them with her hair. It's all in the past tense in chapter 11, but it doesn't happen until chapter 12. So there's something that got mixed up there. And it's part of this motif that works across the Gospels. Some woman did something to Jesus at a banquet, either to his head or his feet. In Luke, it's back in the middle of the Gospel, Luke 7, and it's the certain woman, unnamed woman, who is a sinner. Not to be confused with Mary Magdalene. We'll deal with that next week. And here it is an identified person, Mary, the sister of Martha. And they have now a brother named Lazarus. So you have the same kind of a motif of a meal scene in their house that you have in Luke, but the dynamic, of course, is very different. And we go on in chapter 11, then, of course, to the raising of Lazarus. And these are 3 depictions. Interesting how every one of these depictions of the tomb of Lazarus in antiquity has stairs going up. And we don't actually have much of evidence of tombs that way, with stairs going up like that. But top right, there is Lazarus coming out of his tomb, still all wrapped up. And the one at the bottom, there's a big crowd waiting and watching for this to happen. The raising of Lazarus is a very popular motif in early Christian iconography, in burial situations in the catacombs. It is really one of the most common, and you can understand why, because it's the overcoming of death. But there are 4 confessions of faith in John. In the Synoptic Gospels, you have one, Peter. It's who say blessing to Peter, of Mary and Lazarus.
Carolyn,
Does it?
Carolyn, excuse me, I think you froze there for a minute. So we didn't hear probably the last 2 or 3 sentences. Could you repeat them?
The 4 confessions of faith in John. The Synoptics have only one, by Peter, in the middle of the gospel. John has 4. Is that okay, Maria?
Yeah, that's fine. Got it. Thank you.
Okay. So the first is Nathanael in chapter 1. Remember, Jesus says, I saw you under the fig tree, and Nathanael, we don't understand what that dynamic was. But Nathanael says, you are the Son of God, the King of Israel. Remembering, of course, that the title Son of God here is not Trinitarian. It means someone who is specially favored by God. Peter, at the end of the Bread of Life discourse, says, you are the Holy One of God. Martha. The raising of Lazarus takes most of chapter 11, and I have always thought that the most important part of it is not the actual Lazarus coming out of the tomb. It's the conversation between Jesus and Martha. Remember, he hesitates. He doesn't come right away. And by the time he comes, Lazarus is 4 days in the tomb. Martha hears that he's coming and runs out to meet him with a reproach. If you had been here, my brother would not have died. And yet, I believe whatever you're going to do. And then you have this really beautiful conversation, again, with Jesus taking the first steps and waiting for Martha to respond. And finally, she says, you are the Messiah, Son of God, the coming one, the one who is coming. It's an eschatological title. The one who is always arriving, coming into the world. And then the 4th confession is Thomas in chapter 20. Remember, he wasn't there with the first appearance. He says, I won't believe it until I put my hands in the wounds. A week later, Jesus says, come and do that, and never says whether he actually does really touch the wounds of Jesus. But he says, my Lord and my God. So there's a kind of an escalation of these confessions of faith. And Martha's is one of them. And really, I think a major dynamic. Remember, Jesus says to her, I am the way, the truth, and the life. If you believe in me, then I'm the resurrection. And if you believe in me, you will live. And there's just a beautiful interplay there, in which, again, Jesus is calling her, inviting her into a deeper faith. Their respective roles, Martha and Mary, in Luke and John, are they related? It's interesting. Remember, in Luke, Mary listens and Martha does diaconia. She's the active one. In John, they're both at home with the mourners, and they hear that Jesus is coming, and Martha's the one who goes to meet him. Later, after their conversation, it does say that Mary then goes out to meet him and says exactly the same thing. If you had been here, my brother would not have died. But Martha gets the spotlight because she was the one who took the initiative and entered into the dialogue with him. So there is perhaps a commonality here in the portrayal of the two sisters. Let's look now at women at the cross and the tomb. Here's just a layout of who is there from Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. MM is Mary Magdalene. So we have in Mark, it's almost the same. It is the same, cross and tomb. Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and Salome. Okay, so 3 women. And it's very early when the sun had risen. In Matthew, it's Mary Magdalene, again, Mary, mother of James and Joseph, and probably mother of the sons of Zebedee. So again, 3 women. But at the tomb, it's Mary Magdalene, the other Mary. Which other Mary, we don't know. And it's at dawn. It's a different time. Mm-hmm. In Luke, at the cross, the women who came with him from Galilee, and he doesn't repeat the names because he's already said them back in chapter 8. Mary Magdalene, Joanna, and Susanna. At the tomb, it's Mary Magdalene, Joanna, that's in common. Mary, the mother of James, a different one, probably, and early dawn. In John, at the cross, it's his mother's sister, Mary, wife of Clopas, Mary Magdalene. At the tomb, of course, it's only Mary Magdalene. While it was still dark, and the contrast between when the sun had risen in Mark and while it was still dark in John, they're different times. Of course, look across there, and who's the common one in all of them, and that is Mary Magdalene. Other than that, they don't agree. The names of these women in the different gospels are fluid. The traditions are fluid, and the names change. So here is from San Apollinare Nuovo a portrayal of the empty tomb, the angel and the empty tomb. Again, you've got sort of a platform, and it's done like a temple, like a Roman temple, and you have 2 women, and the one in which you have only two women at the tomb is Matthew, Mary Magdalene, and the other Mary. So presumably it's taking its clue from that one. Just to look at the differences again, they're Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John from left to right. So why do they go? In Mark, it's to anoint the body. Well, they've already seen the stone being placed at the tomb, so that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. In Matthew, it's to see the tomb, just to see it. In Luke, it's to anoint the body again, and then it never says why Mary Magdalene went. What do they see? A young man in white, an angel of the Lord, and an earthquake. Matthew likes earthquakes. Or 2 men in bright robes, or just an empty tomb. But then Mary Magdalene sees 2 angels in white, and then, of course, Jesus. So we have 1 young man in white, 1 angel of the Lord, 2 men in bright robes, and 2 angels in white. All slightly different descriptions. And what do they hear? In Mark, he's not here, he's been raised. Go tell the disciples and Peter to go to Galilee. There's no appearance in Jerusalem at all. In Matthew, he's not here, he's been raised. Tell the disciples he goes to Galilee. And then Jesus himself cuts them off at the pass as they're running back and tells them exactly the same thing. So there is a tomb appearance in Matthew. And then they go to Galilee, and then you have the scene on the mountaintop at the end. In Luke, he's not here, he's been raised. Remember what he said to you. This is unique to Luke. And it goes on to say, and they remembered. So there's this memory action that's going on here with Luke, which is quite unique. And when Mary Magdalene encounters Jesus in John, don't hang on to me, but go tell my brothers. I ascend to our Father and to our God, mine and yours. So basic message, he's not here. That's the message that comes across. But what are they to do about it? It differs slightly. So what do they do? In Mark, they say nothing to anyone because they were afraid. And that's we think the original ending of Mark in verse 8. Then somebody goes on and adds something of resurrection appearances, which is actually a summary of some of the stories from the other Gospels. And it's secondary. So we puzzle over why Mark wanted to end it like that. In Matthew, they go tell the disciples. They do what they were told to do. In Luke, remember how he told you. They remember. And then they tell the 11 and the others. And Peter goes to the tomb. That's probably Peter going to the tomb is probably original, maybe not. In John, Mary Magdalene reports to the disciples, I have seen the Lord. And this is very, very key. And we will talk more about that next week. There's the tradition of the three Marys. Who are the three Marys? Well, you've got to put in the mother of Jesus, who we don't really know. That's her name in John's Gospel, but assuming we allied her with the mother of Jesus, whose name is Mary in the other Gospels. Mary Magdalene, of course. And the third one has to be, third Mary has to be the sister of the mother of Jesus. One of the mysteries is, why would the sister of the mother of Jesus be named Mary if the mother of Jesus is Mary? Though it could be two of those variations, as I said, that are really different names, but the tradition is very odd there. Here's another depiction of the three Marys. Not looking very happy, as if they are. They're getting the appearance, you see, of the angel who's telling them he's not here. So the women at the tomb are the continuous thread from cross to burial to empty tomb. And that has often been recognized, that the Gospels generally say that the male disciples fled. Some of them say that very explicitly. They're not there, except the beloved disciple, if that's John, son of Zebedee. Of course, he would have to be there because he's always there at the right time, doing the right thing. Other than that, there are no gospel traditions about the male disciples being present. Remember that the women are the continuous thread. They are the link from cross to burial to empty tomb. And then the message is, tell all the disciples what you have experienced. And from there, of course, the appearances to the male disciples tend to dominate. So that's where we can stop.
Let's see if we can, you're all invited to put questions or comments in the Q&A box. There's one from Pat Griffin. Do you think that women often, I'm going to read those to you if it's easier. Do you think that women, let me just see, often get the role as teachers of Jesus in the Gospels at Cana? Mary starts Jesus on his ministry. The Syrophoenician woman may have extended his ministry. The woman who washes the feet of Jesus shows him the important act, and he does the same. A widow mourns as she buries her only son. Did this suggest to Jesus the need to take care of his own mother at his dying? I think we could name other examples.
Yeah, the idea of these women teaching Jesus. Yeah, we talked about the Syrophoenician woman last week, and the Samaritan woman too. While she's clearly in the disciple position, she's maybe teaching Jesus how to go about it, what the process, what the steps are, to evangelize her. Yeah. And then about his own mother, well, it's unique to John, of course, that we have that. But yeah, I think that's a lovely reflection.
John 19:25 names again. I guess someone is asking for the names in John 19:25.
At 25, is that the one? Is that the people at the cross? I think it is. Hold on. Yeah, it's the mother of Jesus, Mary, wife of Clopas. No, sorry, the mother of Jesus, the mother's sister, comma, Mary, wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. And when I say that, I said it works in Greek the way it works in English. We don't know if the mother's sister is Mary, wife of Clopas, or if the mother's sister is also unnamed, and there's another woman, Mary, wife of Clopas. It's usually taken that that's in grammatical in apposition. That is that the mother's sister is Mary, the wife of Clopas. But it could be 4 women that are being talked about there, in which case neither the mother nor the sister is called Mary.
Carolyn, I have a question. When you start biblical studies, one of the things that you learn is that, the Gospels, the key proclamation, the kerygma, was the passion, the death, and resurrection of Jesus. And I guess it just dawned on me listening to you tonight that in what is supposed to be the most essential part of the Christian kerygma, the story of Jesus's passion, death, and resurrection, the women have such a prominent place in John's gospel. It's just a comment. I mean, I was thinking that would be, and I think people have commented, that's precisely where you wouldn't want women if you're trying to portray this in the most reliable terms, because wasn't it the case that women were not witnesses? Maybe you could talk a little bit about that and the impact of having these women supposedly at what is the most central part of the Christian proclamation.
Well, it's very interesting that our earliest commentator on it all, Paul, never mentions the appearance to the women. In 1 Corinthians 15, he appeared to this, and there's no mention to women. And there's no mention of an empty tomb either. And though there are 2 passing references to a psalm in Acts that might be, because even though Luke tells the story of the empty tomb in the gospel, in Acts there's no mention of actually of the empty tomb. Is that because they didn't consider it real proof. I mean, Mary Magdalene is already onto this in John. They've taken the body, in Matthew, they set a guard so that they don't take the body and say he's risen, So there's this obvious explanation of somebody stole the body, and that's why the tomb is empty. It rests, the testimony of the resurrection rests on appearances. Now, to go back to women, people try sometimes to say, well, which gospel gives more attention to women, Luke or John? I think comparisons are odious here. I don't want to take one or the other. But look, in Luke, you've got Mary and Elizabeth and Anna in the infancy narratives, okay? After that, not much. Well, you've got then the women disciples, of course, are mentioned in chapter 8. And the women at the tomb and the cross. Whereas in John, you've got this Samaritan woman and the portrayals of Mary and Martha particularly, who I'm just so impressed by that conversation that happens there, in chapter 11. So maybe if you, by numbers, by count, maybe there aren't as many, but I think they're very significant. And the mother of Jesus, the role that she plays there. So does that kind of answer your question? We've got some chats here.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me see. You mentioned that it was unusual for the Samaritan woman to be alone at the well. Perhaps the names of the women at the cross tomb, besides Mary Magdalene, the mother of Jesus, were merely added to make sure they are not seen in isolation, so that they're not alone.
Uh-huh. Yeah, sure. I think that's quite possible, because you don't really expect women to be going around alone, mm-hmm. Socially. They don't do that. Mm-hmm. There was a question, are there 3 or 4 women? Well, it's ambiguous. That's the thing. It's ambiguous in English as it is in Greek. We don't know. People tend to assume we're talking about 3. But it could be 4. But never do we have any kind of artistic portrayal of 4 women there. We don't even have the sister of the mother of Jesus, this Mary, wife of Clopas. She simply drops out of the imagery.
Right.
So, but she's there very clearly in John's story. Is there any agreement on which is preferred, 3 or 4 women? Well, I just answered that. I think they tend to prefer 3. A copying error. It's not a copying error because there are no commas in Greek.
Right.
Let's see. Did we answer this one? Or you mentioned it was unusual for some. Oh yeah, we did answer that. Okay. I was going to say the same thing about the comma. I don't remember punctuation being. No, that's right. There isn't. That's modern interpolation.
I think there's a question from Rita Houlihan. Can you see that one? And Luke's scene at the tomb. Do you see that one?
Yeah. Luke's scene at the tomb. When the woman remembered that Jesus had predicted his death and rising, Carla Ricci posits that it is a revealing trace that points back to scenes in chapter 9 where Jesus predicts his death to his closest disciples, and therefore Mary Magdalene and the other women were there as members of his closest circle of followers. Yeah. Imagining the women there in Luke 9:18 is quite a startling image, given how women have been erased in traditional church teaching. Oh, yeah. Yeah, very true. I mean, this whole thing, I keep saying, how do you imagine these things? And our imagination is so limited by the restrictions that have been put on in preaching, in lectionary, in imagery that don't have to be there. Patricia Griffin's question. What have I not answered? Patricia Griffin's question.
I think.
I'm sorry if I didn't. I'm going back to look.
Here's a comment from Sister Emerita again. If Clovis and his wife were walking on the road to Emmaus and recognized him in the breaking of the bread, they must have been present at the Last Supper. That's ends of the question.
I'll get back to Patricia in a moment after I deal with this. Yeah, you see, throughout Luke's gospel, you have characteristic scenes of not only Luke and the other synoptic, even in John, the multiplication of loaves. There are other scenes where Jesus is at meals and he's recognized at meals. But yeah, sure, why not? Why couldn't they be at the Last Supper? Again, our imagination, Da Vinci, you get 12 guys there with Jesus. Read the text. I mean, Mark, for example, says 2 of the disciples go to rent the room, the upper room, okay, prepare the place. And then it says Jesus came with the 12. Well, those other 2 disciples presumably were also there once they prepared the thing and rented the room, If you read carefully and remember with in John, it's the disciples. He never says the 12 at the supper. It's much more of an open kind of depiction than we tend to think. And I think they brought their wives, I mean, if all the disciples talk about this, all the gospels talk about this number of women, all the synoptics do, a number of women, many women who have followed him. My assumption is some of those were the wives of some of the male disciples too, and a Passover celebration, which it is in the synoptics, is a family celebration. Just go off with your guy friends for that. So okay, Patricia Griffin. Sorry, I thought we had done this, but do you think that women often get the role as teachers of Jesus in the Gospels? Cana. Mary starts Jesus on his ministry. The Syrophoenician woman may have extended his ministry. The woman who washes the feet of Jesus show him this important act, and he does the same to his disciples. A widow mourns as she buries her only son. Did this suggest to Jesus the need to take care of his own mother? That's the piece that I didn't deal with. We're crossing gospels here. That's why I didn't answer it. You're talking, for example, of the widow with her only son. That's in Luke. The Syrophoenician woman is in Mark and Matthew. And none of those 3 gospels talk about Jesus taking care of his mother. So that's why we can speculate on this, but I don't think the gospel writers themselves suggest that. But it's a wonderful insight. Yeah.
There's another question way down at the bottom regarding Clovis and wife at the Last Supper that refers to We Are Church in Ireland, has 2 beautiful paintings.
The Last Supper.
Yeah.
2 beautiful paintings of the Last Supper Seder meal with women and children. Yeah, good. Available as large prints and postcards. Confirmation students enjoy them. Yeah. I think of it as really as a much larger group of people.
Carolyn, since we don't know who the authors of the Gospels were, right? We only have tradition, and we have such a prominent place for women as real interlocutors and women with theological insights in John's Gospel. What do you think about the idea that perhaps the author of the 4th Gospel was actually a woman herself who showcased the women that we see in this Gospel who are so prominent that we don't find in the other Gospels? I mean, the Samaritan woman has a lengthy discourse with Jesus. If you took together Martha and the Samaritan woman's discourse, that might be more than what a lot of people combined had to say in conversations with Jesus. So do you think, do you give any credence to that hypothesis that maybe it was a woman who penned this gospel, authored this gospel, was behind the tradition in this gospel?
Of John. You're talking about John. Mm-hmm. Well, we don't know. I mean, it's certainly not impossible. The number of women authors that we know from that period of time is very, very small. Mm-hmm. And their works have not survived in general. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I think I have to say unlikely, but not impossible. Yeah, leave it at that. There's a Q&A in here, I think. It's a stunning truth that Jesus as a person and a man is a stunning example of the wholeness of Jesus as a man. And that he is equally free with all, a person who shows himself as both a man and a person, home with women. Yeah. Yeah, and that is something that I think comes across in all the Gospels in different ways, but he's a free spirit in a way. He's a man who does not suffer fools easily. He's a man who is not limited by social constraints, and it gets him in a lot of trouble, of course, as it does with anyone who is like that, is that free in society. But yeah, I think that certainly is evident. And we have Leonard Swidler has a thesis that women wrote the Gospels or were the sources. Being sources, that's another issue. Well, the infancy narratives, for example, I mean, there's an old tradition that Mary was responsible, was behind the Lucan infancy narratives. Remember, Luke says she kept all these things and treasured them in her heart. And that's quite possible that you would have the women who experience these things, that authors would think to go to them and to listen to their stories. Yeah. Was that it?
Yeah, or on that same note, or that a woman would be attuned to the kind of activity or dialogues between Jesus and other women. Just the way I think women are today, you know. I mean, you listen to the Pope, he talks to a lot of men, but when he's talking to Sister Beckhart, when he's talking to women in a particular way, you kind of your ears are kind of perked to listen to those conversations, and you remember them well. So to the last person's comment, I mean, and what I meant by author, I meant in terms of the kind of memory behind the tradition. Could very well be a woman, or a woman jointly with a man, just the way they say, you know, Peter was the kind of memory behind Mark's gospel. It's very possible that the beloved disciple may have been a woman. Mary Magdalene may have given us part of that tradition. I guess I just feel of all of the gospels, the sense that there's a woman's memory at play here seems to be a little bit stronger than when you're reading Matthew, Mark, and Luke.
Yeah, I think that's well said. Particularly things that deal with the world of women, the experiences of women, children, childbirth, burial. Women are connected both obviously with childbirth, but also with burial customs, preparing the body for burial. So think about that in terms of the burial of Jesus, you know. But sure, all of the kinds of responses, the kinds of relationships that women have, they would be much more attuned to the storytelling about that. Yeah.
And maybe to the recuperation of the figure of Martha, who in the other Gospels is a cranky, workhorse, and in this Gospel, figures.
She really stands out. She gets redeemed.
She gets redeemed. So you think some woman was looking at that saying, that's not right. Let's fix this. And Carter gives this woman a platform for an incredible theological discourse and profession of faith, as you pointed out. So that's kind of interesting. So any more questions?
Martha then becomes, in tradition, the dragon slayer in medieval tradition. We have another thing from Rita. Holly, wait a minute. From Rita Houlihan. In Holly Heron's study of narrative tradition in Gospels, I think that she concluded the dialogue between Jesus and Mary Magdalene in the garden at the tomb was probably and dialogue repeated in the storytelling around the cooking fires, for example. Oh, yeah. Storytelling is just, it's really part of this. It's a very important part of it. And stories, as they're retold, change. When I started biblical studies, there was this thing about getting the right method to find the original sayings of Jesus. Well, when people tell the same stories over and over again, it changes in different situations. The storyteller himself or herself changes the story as the context goes. So there's no original form. Even Jesus wouldn't have recognized an original form of what he was saying. It's all contextual. And that's part of the reason I think that you have these variations in the gospel stories, because they originate in different segments of the community of believers in Jesus.
Do we have any other questions, comments? Raise your hand if you don't like to type. We have just a couple more minutes, or if you'd like to make a comment, unmute yourself. Feel free to speak out. Well,
yep, we got something. Yeah, there's
one. Mm-hmm.
How would you describe Jesus as the true
evangelizer at the well?
Oh, evangelizer at the well. How would you describe Jesus as the true evangelizer at the well? As a true evangelizer at the well, as someone who knows how to attract another person to the truth. Now, I almost said not to himself, but to the truth. But of course, in John's gospel, Jesus is the truth. So it is to himself. But in terms of model evangelizing, just knowing the right thing to say and just taking things step by step. I think that's what he shows there, and how effective it is by not dumping everything on her all at once, but taking it step by step. Does that answer?
Thank you.
Maybe still something there. Hold on. Oh, just a thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you. All right. Well, everyone, thank you for participating again tonight. And on that note, about Jesus as the true evangelizer. And it's interesting, if you just listen to what Karen said, he doesn't dump it on her all at once. And that's a lesson to take away from the gospel, isn't it? That when we're dealing with people, we have to remember people's capacity and be gentle with them as Jesus was. So,
Mhm.
Carolyn, we thank you. Thank you all very much. We're getting a lot of thank yous and bravos to you. And we look forward to seeing you all again next Thursday night at 7 p.m. God bless. Have a great night. Keep the spirit alive. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye now.